Timo Buell, head of the Energy Technology Policy Division, IEA, to launch the IEA Global EV Outlook 2021. Mr. Buell, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yeah, great pleasure for me to be here. Good morning, in fact, dear colleagues from Paris. My name is Timo Buell. I'm the head of the Energy Technology Policy Division here at the IEA, which is in charge of developing each year the global EV outlook. I'm very happy to be able to present it to you today here at this impressive congress, and I congratulate China and China's Society of Automotive Engineers for having gathered so many excellent experts here in the room, but also virtually around the virtual table to discuss the topic of zero emissions vehicles. Let me start with a few words of background. The global EV outlook that I will speak about today is the flagship publication of the IEA's electric vehicles initiative. The electric vehicle initiative, or EVI as we call it, is an initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial that is dedicated to accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles worldwide. It was established at the Clean Energy Ministerial in 2010, so 11 years ago, and the IEA has been its coordinator ever since. The initiative is a multi-government policy forum dedicated to collaborative activities that support the design and implementation of domestic electric vehicle deployment policies and programs. Within the initiative, what we do is we facilitate exchanges between governments that are committed to supporting electric vehicle deployment, together with a variety of partners, including from the industry. The initiative currently has 15 member countries, with Canada and China, in fact, being the two co-chairs of the initiatives, and we are working with a number of partner organizations as well. Let me use this opportunity, therefore, to express my sincere appreciation to China, our partners and colleagues in China, and the government of China for your support as a co-lead of the electric vehicle initiative, and we look forward to continue engaging with you on this subject. Within this initiative, we've carried out many activities over the past decade, amongst others, to mobilize action and commitments, be it through our EV 30 at 30 campaign that we launched in 2017, or the Drive to Zero campaign that we launched in 2020. And we, of course, look forward to working with UNEP and other partners on the GEF7 mobility program moving forward. I understand our friend Rob de Jong will launch this in a couple of minutes of time. Why do we at the IEA put so much efforts into electric mobility? There is a very simple answer, to be honest. The simple answer is that electric vehicles can help address local air pollution, they can reduce oil import bills, and very importantly, of course, they're a key way to address climate change. The IEA's net zero emissions roadmap for the year 2050 that we released in May this year highlighted how EVs play a key role in cutting emissions and limiting the global rise in temperature to 1.5 degrees. We have set out 400 different milestones to put the world on track for reaching net zero emissions globally by the year 2050. And we highlighted that EV sales need to increase from what was 5% last year in 2020 to more than 60% at a global level by the year 2030. Now, let me now share my screen. I hope this will work. So I hope you can see the slides now, and discuss a bit the point of departure. No, I mean, 60% sales share target for 2030 is a very ambitious number, of course, in many ways. So where are we coming from? We're coming from a period of extraordinary growth over the last 5 years. Even if growth somewhat slowed in the year 2019. Total sales in that year still reached more than 2 million cars at the end of 2019. And then in early 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, the whole car market globally collapsed. Total car sales, in fact, fell by 16% year on year in the year 2020 relative to the year 2019, the largest drop since the global financial crisis. And many expected that not only total car sales would fall, but also electric car sales would decline. But this was not the case. Despite the pandemic, electric car sales increased to 3 million globally at the end of 2020, a growth of around 40%, and this against the backdrop of a collapsing global car market. As a result, the share of electric cars in global car sales was nearly 5% that year. In other words, 1 out of 20 cars sold in 2020 was actually electric. We have no reason to believe that this year will not be another record year. In fact, our initial numbers suggest that we are already overtaking now in 2021 the total car sales of the year 2020. So total electric car sales. So really good news on that front as well. The backbone of the growth, you see it here in light blue and in dark blue, have been China and Europe. For the first time actually in 2020, Europe became the largest electric car market, with electric car sales reaching 1.4 million. There are 3 main reasons, according to our analysis, why electric car sales were so resilient to the pandemic. Number 1 is car manufacturers are expanding the offer of electric car models while battery costs are falling, making electric cars increasingly attractive and competitive for consumers. Number 2, supportive regulatory frameworks. Even before the pandemic, many countries were strengthening policies such as CO2 emission standards and zero-emission vehicle mandates to support electric car sales. More than 20 countries worldwide had announced bans on sales of conventional cars, or mandated all cars to be new sales to be zero-emission vehicles sometime over the next decade or 2. The third key reason why electric car sales were so resilient to the pandemic are the additional incentives that were adopted by many governments around the world to safeguard EV sales from the economic downturn. In particular, in European countries, where purchase incentives, subsidies were increased, and also China somewhat delayed the phase out of its subsidy scheme. As I mentioned before, subsidies have played an important role in supporting electric car sales, but we also see a growing model offer in many different countries, and an increasing appetite for these technologies around the market. Here you see the various different incentives that were adopted. I already mentioned Europe to be a key market in which electric vehicle subsidies have increased. This is a phenomenon both for battery electric vehicles, but also plug-in electric vehicles, and China here also being extremely supportive. Now, when it comes to the consumer appetite for electric car sales, it's worth recognizing that consumers spent around $120 billion in electric cars, up roughly 50% from previous years. This increase is mostly due to increased sales and slightly because of higher average prices of electric cars. Compared to consumer spending, governments have actually spent much less, despite this increase in subsidies, around $14 billion in the year 2020. And what we're finding is that when you look at things over time, then the share of government spending out of total spending has actually been steadily declining over the years and is now 10% on a global average. In other words, for every dollar of government incentives, private consumers invest $10. So on the one hand, it is essential for incentives to be continued, but at the same time, we are seeing how electric cars are becoming increasingly attractive to consumer. So far, we've focused somewhat on electric cars, but the good news here is really that electrification is not only about cars alone. Actually, the most heavily electrified road transport mode are 2- and 3-wheelers. In 2020, electric 2- 3-wheeler sales were 1 order of magnitude higher than for cars, roughly around 25 million. For 2- 3-wheelers, actually almost 1 of every 3 vehicles sold globally was actually electric, so a share of 35%. That is not the full story. As you see here, there has also been a lot of progress on the deployment of electric vans, buses, and heavy trucks, although of course at a much lower number. In fact, 1 out of every 7 buses sold in 2020 was electric at a global level. It is important to recognize, and this I think will be good news in the ears of China, that this is not a global phenomenon. You see it here. In fact, in most segments, China is by far the largest electric vehicle markets. Virtually all electric 2- 3-wheelers were sold in China, almost half of the vans, and almost all buses and trucks. Looking now out into the future, very evidently and not surprisingly, I would think, the outlook for EVs for the next decade is very bright. Under existing and announced policy announcement, the stock of electric vehicles across all transport modes, but excluding 2- 3-wheelers, is expected to increase from 11 million today to roughly 145 million by the year 2030. By then, in fact, around 1 out of every 14 vehicles that we see on the road will be electric. And this is only on the basis of existing policies. Of course, the upside potential here for electric vehicles is much larger. To reach net zero emissions from the whole energy system by the year 2050 would suggest that the global EV fleet would need to reach more than 360 million by the year 2030, achieving a stock share of roughly 20%. Why are electric vehicles important for climate change? Are they at all? This is sometimes being discussed in some circles. The evidence here is already today electric vehicles are reducing emissions. In 2020, the global EV fleet emitted about 50 million tons of CO2 equivalents, so CO2, but also other greenhouse gases. But the equivalent fleet of conventional vehicles would have emitted roughly twice the amount of CO2 equivalents or greenhouse gases. So the fleet of around 11 million electric vehicles on the road has avoided 50 million tons of CO2 equivalent. On the basis of existing and planned policies, we're expecting not only the electric vehicle fleet to grow, but also the power sector to continue decarbonizing through the uptake of renewables in particular. And so we would see only on the basis of existing policies that the global EV fleet will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by around 1/3 compared to an equivalent fleet of conventional vehicles, saving around 120 million tons of CO2 equivalents by the year 2030. If we want to reach net zero emissions by the year 2050, we would have two effects again. We would have an even higher EV stock, and we would have an even faster decarbonization of the power sector, meaning that around 630 million tons of CO2 equivalents would be avoided by the year 2030, compared with an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle fleet. Let me finalize this presentation by putting together some of the key thoughts key findings from our global EV outlook this year. First, it is important to recognize that the global EV market proved to be resilient in 2020, despite the outbreak of the pandemic, thanks to the existing regulatory frameworks that were already in place, and thanks to the additional incentives that some countries provided. Our indication right now for 2021 is that electric car sales continue to boom worldwide, and so we are set for another record year this year. Second point is that the pandemic is obviously offering the possibility for sustainable recovery, building back better, as it's sometimes referred to. Through the recovery funds, governments have the opportunity to promote electric vehicles, not just EV sales, but also the rollout of charging infrastructure and the building of factories to produce EVs as well as sustainable batteries. Third point, it is very likely that EV deployment will continue to grow over this decade, but we do still believe that there is a need to strengthen policies to enable a larger EV deployment in line with the targets brought to us by the International Panel on Climate Change for reaching 1.5 degrees in the long term. Tightening fuel economy and CO2 emission standards, enforcing zero emission vehicle mandates in all countries and regions that do not have such policies in place yet are a key opportunity. Supporting the rollout of publicly accessible charging infrastructure, developing standards for environmentally and social responsibility. Battery manufacturing are a key area of attention. And finally, decarbonizing electricity generation, of course, to fully reap the environmental benefits. All these will be areas to be strengthened in order to tap into the potential of electric vehicles. From the IEA perspective, we will continue not only to monitor the progress on electric vehicles, but also support active electric vehicle deployment, be it through working with governments around the world to put in place the right policies, such as in our electric vehicle initiative, or in collaboration with other partners from around the world. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you an excellent event.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Gill. It's a very exciting report, and as you said, IEA is one key, play a very important role to coordinate the global efforts to address climate change. And as you mentioned that, as your report point out that the electric vehicles go very quickly, but still not enough to meet our climate change goal, 1.5 degree is goal. We need to do much better. And you also mentioned about the charging structure, the decarbonization of the power, kind of key issues, and battery, of course. So thanks for your the outlook. And now we'll move to next part. The launch of the UNEP Global Electric Mobility Program. Mr. Rob D. Jonger, head of Sustainable Mobility Unit in UNEP, will launch the program. Mr. Jonger, please.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for the invitation to speak today, and also thanks and congratulations to, of course, to the government of China, not only for hosting this important conference, but also taking leadership worldwide in the electrification of the global vehicle fleet. And thank you for the Society of Automotive Engineers of China for hosting this important conference, and Ms. Hui and Mr. Zhang, you, the moderator, and also thanks to Timo Gül, with giving us a very excellent presentation to start off with. So what I want to focus on is taking it further from Timo, who gave us a very good picture and a very good picture, positive picture of where we're going globally. I want to focus on the need for a global approach to electrification of the global vehicle fleet, and that global approach, low and middle income countries. And then I'll focus on what UNEP and its partners meet the climate targets through that global approach. So that is what I'll be focusing on in my mission. I'm going to show some slides. I'm sharing my screen now. Let me see if you can see my slides now. Maybe so. That means that everybody can see them, right? What I want to talk a little bit about is the need for a global approach. As you can see, from it's going to double by 2050, even more than double. We're going to add more than 1 billion vehicles every year to the global vehicle fleet. And so that's a huge increase, and potentially a huge increase of climate emissions and also air pollution. As you can also see, the far majority, actually all that growth that is happening in the dark blue countries, which are the non-OECD countries. Can you hear me? Yeah. So all that growth is going to take place in non-OECD countries. And so we're going to add 1 billion vehicles, and they're all going to be added in low and middle income countries. I can hear a lot of echo. Maybe people can mute themselves. Okay. So the question is, what are these 1 billion vehicles that we're going to add? What vehicles will they be? And what does it mean for climate change? Some time ago, UNEP and its partners did some modeling. And the good news is the news what Timo Gül already told us on the left-hand side. We're going to see many electric vehicles now being added to the market, and we're also going to see many grids decarbonize, meaning that the introduction of electric vehicles will significantly reduce the global emissions of the vehicle fleet. And on the left-hand side, you can see that we think that by 2050, the average vehicle will reduce its emissions by more than 90%. So that's the good news. But on the right-hand side, we see the challenge. And the challenge is that we're still going to have these 1 billion extra vehicles in low and middle income countries. And in the coming years, those vehicles will not be electric as it stands today. And so if we're going to add 1 billion vehicles in the coming years in low and middle income countries and they're not electric, we're going to see a huge increase of the emissions of the global vehicle fleet. The red line on the right-hand side shows the emissions of the global vehicle fleet if we include already all the policies adopted today. You can see a steep increase of the emissions of the global vehicle fleet. If we're going to really take what is possible and try and make those vehicles electric, we can go to the blue line. And if we even maximize our efforts in bringing electric vehicles and decarbonizing the vehicle grid, we can get to the green line. But you can see still the green line is not getting us where we need to be, which is the black dot, the black square. So what does this mean? It means two things, basically. First, it means we need to do everything to reduce the growth of vehicles in the coming decades. By having better public transport, by creating walking cycling facilities in cities, so we reduce the dependency of the private vehicle. That's the first thing. And secondly, it means that we need to make sure that all the vehicles that we're adding and all the vehicle growth that is going to happen in the next decades will be those of electric vehicles with zero emission. And even then you can see it's going to be challenging to meet the target. So what do the scientists say? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has stated that by 2035, we should not be adding any fossil fuel powered vehicles to the global fleet. So in 14 years from now, all cars in the whole world, new cars, must be electric to meet the Paris climate target. Assuming that those cars will drive around then another 15 to 20 years, we could have a zero emission vehicle fleet by 2050. So this is very ambitious what needs to be done. In the next 14 years, every country in the world needs to stop adding fossil fuel cars. This may be very achievable by Norway, who's already there halfway. It may be very challenging by China, but still possible in the next 14 years to have all cars, new cars, to be electric. But it's a huge challenge for countries like Vietnam, Kenya, or Peru. And they will not be able to meet this target as we're going today. So that is the challenge that we have, that the global vehicle fleet will only be adding electric cars latest 2035. So what is UNEP doing about this? What is the challenge, and what is UNEP helping to fight this and overcome this challenge? UNEP, together with our partners, including the International Energy Agency that we just heard of, but also development banks, World Bank, and a number of institutions that are leading in the area of electric mobility, is now working to support this global shift to electric mobility. We are already working in 50 countries around the world, low and mid-income countries, to put them on a roadmap towards electric mobility. We have major support from the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, Germany, the European Union. A number of foundations and bilateral government aid are helping us and our partners to achieve this target of switching to zero emissions vehicles in low and mid-income countries. But we have no time to lose. And we need to speed this up. And how are we going to do this? Well, first, as Timo said already, there's much happening outside of just electric cars. Electric 2- and 3-wheelers are the low-hanging fruit. And many countries are now completely switching their 2- and 3-wheelers to electric. And China, again, is leading here. And there's a lot of interest to switching to light-duty vehicle fleet. And a lot of countries want to help and want us to work with them to do that. But also the opportunities for switching to electric buses, and again, China is leading in this area, shows what can be done with changing over buses that are quite pollutive and also will be driving around for a long time. So maybe a few more words more about our program. What are we doing to help these countries to join the global shift to electric mobility, to meet that target that has been set, to meet the Paris climate agreement of having only electric vehicles by 2035? Well, we are doing 4 things, and they're very much in line with what you heard earlier about the challenges. The challenges in Europe or China or United States are not different from the challenges in Asia and China and Asia, Latin America and Africa, but there are local differences. First thing we need to do on the right-hand corner is we need to introduce pilots and training. There's still a lack of awareness. There's a lack of hands-on experience with electric mobility. We need to introduce the first bus fleets in the cities in Africa. We need to introduce the first electric 3-wheeler fleets in Asian countries, or the first electric taxi fleets around the world. So the first thing we're doing is piloting electric mobility in these countries that haven't yet started. The second thing we're doing is looking at finance. Even though electric mobility now is cheaper than fossil fuels mobility and vehicles, still upfront investment is higher. So we're looking at ways to overcome that upfront investment, to pay that extra few $100,000 for the electric bus, which will then be recouped by reduced costs, reduced energy costs, reduced fuel costs when you drive that bus around. So financing is very important. That's why we're working with all the multilateral development banks. Thirdly, we need to look at policy and also standards. These are technical standards, but also, for example, fiscal policies. As we heard before, a number of countries are providing serious fiscal policies and continue to do so. Not all developing countries will be able to provide fiscal incentives at the same size as, for example, Europe is doing. But also we need standardization of the products being imported and produced locally. So that's the third area of intervention, policy and standards. And finally, when we get the pilots, when we get the finance in place, and we get the right policy standards in place, we can talk about setting roadmaps and strategies, like some countries around the world are already doing, for example, roadmaps and strategies towards the complete switch over to electric mobility. So let me give some details about our global program that we're launching in the coming months and that is supporting electrification around the world. At national level And we're building on the work that we've done with the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, where we supported countries around the world to have more efficient fleets. We're now also, as a priority, including introduction of electric vehicles to make vehicle fleets more efficiently. You can see here already the number of countries that are already working with us in our global program, with our partners, to introduce electric mobility. Buses, cars, motorcycles, or just national policies. And you can see there's many partners involved in these country projects that we're supporting to switch to electric mobility. That's at the country level. Much is happening. There's a lot of interest from countries around the world to join this program, to also start moving to electric mobility. Now, if we look at the regional level, at the regional level, a number of our organizations, development banks, UNEP, IEA, institutions like the Molina Center, Cleaner Asia, some of them will be speaking later in this program. They are working together to support countries to switch to electric mobility, especially support low and middle income countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America and Caribbean. So what are we doing? We're setting up regional platforms that will support those projects with technical support, with training, with help desks, etc. But we're also setting up at regional level an investment platform that brings together the countries that want to introduce, for example, electric buses in Latin America, with the finances that are interested to help them introduce those electric buses, and the companies that provide the buses. We're going to bring them together so that we can have procurement opportunities and bring these electric vehicles to low and middle income countries, where there's a large market if we have the right products. So that's at regional level. And this is giving a bit of details about that one. At global level, we're looking at developing a number of toolkits that provide a number of tools that help countries switch to electric mobility. It's not always possible just to take an electric motorcycle from India and use it in Africa. It's not always possible to take an electric bus from China and use it in Latin America. So we have technology challenges. And it's also sometimes difficult to get the financing. So we have financing challenges. And we also need to write policies and standards for those vehicles. So all of these areas, we're developing a set of tools that help countries overcome them. Cost-benefit analysis, an overview of technologies available, an overview of the data needed and the data available. So all these tools will help these countries with introducing electric mobility. And we're developing 4 tool sets for tools, one on light-duty vehicles, which is headed by the International Energy Agency, one on heavy-duty vehicles, which is headed by UNEP, one on 2- and 3-wheelers headed by UNEP, and one on grid issues, charging issues, electricity infrastructure issues, which is headed by the International Energy Agency. And with those tools at global level, with these trainings and support of investment at regional level, we hope to be able to develop a comprehensive set of tools that can help low and middle income countries to start also electrifying and to start become part of the global program to switch to electric mobility. As I said, this is just the beginning. We're launching this program with a number of our partners, and we already have a set of countries. We're now adding, with the support of the JEF, another set of countries. And you can see them here, which countries they are. And some of these countries will be speaking later in this morning event. As I said, we're now launching those regional support and investment platforms and these global working groups. This is going to happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And we're starting right now, or we have already started with those activities. And everybody that's interested to work at global level, to work at the regional platforms to support these countries and be involved in national projects, please let us know, and you're most welcome to join us. And finally, and I'm closing here, some words about the COP, the upcoming COP, because there's many preparations ongoing for the COP, and we've been involved in regional platforms and dialogues in Africa and Asia Pacific and other regions. And we're working together with other programs that are also working on electric mobility. So much is happening. As you heard before, countries are now setting targets to stop using petrol vehicles and switch to electric vehicles. And the COP26 will give a huge momentum to this. More countries will come forward and will start adopting roadmaps and targets. And it's important that these countries are also low and medium income countries and not only developed countries. And this is what we're working on. Today's conference is therefore an important step towards that. Next month, we have the United Nations Secretary General's Conference on Sustainable Mobility, which will be in Beijing, which will be another important step. And then at the COP, we hope to start working on such a global approach. But it doesn't stop at the COP, Climate COP. Climate COP is at the end of this year in November, December. But next year, the next Climate COP will be in Africa, COP27. And there we're going to take stock. I have been successful to involve low and medium income countries in this global shift. Because if we have not in the coming years, I take you back to my first slides, we're going to see 1 billion extra internal combustion engine vehicles. But even in the next couple of years, we are able to set such a global roadmap. We will be able to electrify and meet the targets set by, for example, the IPCC and set by the international community in the Paris Climate Agreement. So that is the challenge that we have. And that's what we'll be working on in the coming years to make sure we have a true global approach to electric mobility. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. I think now we're going into the panel sessions to discuss this further. But back to you, Mr. Zhang, and thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jonger. Thanks for it's an exciting program, and in many countries, as you mentioned, 7 countries, and work together with your partners. You have with your toolbox, you have a lot of projects to support the development of e-mobility. So we're looking forward to hear the progress of your projects in many countries and more countries. Thank you. And I think you will continue your work to moderate the next session, the supporting the global transition to the e-mobility. So you will be the moderator. So Mr. Jonger, I will hand this one to you, this session to you, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Zhang. Yes, so this is a nice transition. I was able to make my presentation, and now I'm sharing the panel. We're going to have 2 panels. And the panel that... Excuse me? Can you hear me?
Excuse me, it's okay now.
Okay. Okay, good. Let me continue. So we're going to have 3 panels. The first panel is going to talk about the global transition. I introduced already the global transition, the need for a global transition. The second panel is going to talk about the regional dimension. The third panel is going to talk about cities and countries and moving. So I've been asked to moderate the global panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen to 4 presenters and panel members, but we also want to give the opportunity to everybody in the audience to start asking questions. And so as we're going to listen to the panel members, please put your questions in the chat box. So when you look at the buttons below at the screen, you see there's a button chat. If you click on that, you can be to everybody on the panel. But please already during the presentations and the interventions we're going to hear now, feel free to put your questions in. So let me introduce my panelists. Today we have 4 panelists. First, we have Angela Hulbert, lead of the Climate Champions COP26 team. Hi, Angela. I can see you there.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hi. Secondly, we have, great to have you. Good to see you again. Second, we have Anthony Ebrd, who's the Director of Transportation of the Climate Works Foundation, who's working to bring all the philanthropy together to support switching to zero emissions mobility for climate. Thirdly, we have Patrick André. Patrick André is the Principal Secretary of the Department of Land Transport of the Republic of Seychelles. Seychelles is a small island developing state, seriously affected by climate change, but also playing a major role to show the world what they can do to go to electric mobility, and we're going to listen to Patrick in a moment. And fourthly, we have Yumin Gong, who's a Senior Director for Transportation Program of the Energy Foundation in Kenya, supporting many electric mobility projects in China, I understand. So what I want to do, I want to listen to the four panelists a little bit, and then we're going to open up and we're going to address some of your questions. And I can see already questions coming in. So I also encourage my panel members to keep checking, so I'm not the only one. Keep checking the questions. And if you see some that you want to respond to, we'll do that in the second part of the panel session. But let me first ask a general question to all my panelists. And if they can be very brief to make a short introduction, then we go to the rest of the session after that. And the general question that I have is, you are all working on the area of transportation and climate change. And I would like to know a little bit more about what you're doing, what's your personal experience, and why do you think this is so important? So maybe I can start with Angela.
Absolutely.
Over to you, Angela.
Yes, I think why it's important, well, of course, you can't have net zero without addressing transportation and mobility, and that's true for businesses and countries. Most of my personal experience actually comes from being head of sustainable mobility at IKEA, where we set a target of having 100% electric home deliveries in 2025. What I know from that work is that once you go electric, there is absolutely zero desire to go back. We see all the drivers who have moved to electric vehicles being much happier with their working conditions. And I know that it works, especially for light duty deliveries. In China, 90% of IKEA deliveries are already electric. The business case is there, the support system is there. So I know it works and I know it can be done.
Great. I'm looking forward to hear more about that, Angela, and about the COP26 team. Thank you for joining us. Patrick, Seychelles, why is electric mobility important for you?
Good morning to all. Yes, definitely electric mobility is very important for us in the sense that we are very vulnerable and with the climate change situation that is happening around the world. And for us being a small island state, we depend a lot on imported fuel. And we have a vast abundance of solar energy that we can tap into and try to convert that into electricity. But we have embarked on several measures to try and improve and encourage the use of environmentally friendly vehicles. And also we've put in place incentive to make that happen by, for example, the electric vehicles has zero tax that we charge, whereas other environmentally friendly vehicles like hybrid, they have between 5 to 25% tax that is applied. But on top of that, we have increased tax on fossil fuel vehicles to try and discourage that and move to the more environmentally friendly. And definitely, it will help us improve our environment, which we try to preserve as much as possible. It will improve our health situation so that health-wise, we will be a more healthier country and less burden on our economy with regards to our emission, which causes a lot of health factors. So this is generally there, but I've been working a lot with UNFCCC. I've been co-authors with literatures or projects. And now we are embarking on this GEF project for electric mobility for Seychelles, which again will be a boost for us. But I work more on the policy and regulatory sides of things together with the Ministry of Finance to try and see how best we can continue to facilitate the introduction or the continuation of use of electric or environmentally friendly vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm quite sure we're going to come back on financing. And I have to say, Seychelles is one of the most beautiful places I've been to in my life, and we can see some of it in the background between you, as we look out of your window, how green it is. So I'm jealous. Yes. So Anthony, are you with us? Anthony Eckert of Climate Works. I haven't seen Anthony yet, nor have I heard about Anthony. Anthony, are you with us? Anthony's, I think, joining us from California, so possibly middle of the night. So I may still be. So I don't hear Anthony at the moment. So let's see if he joins later. Let me go to the next panel member. Gong Huiming, are you with us? Can you talk a little bit about why electric mobility?
Can you hear me today? Okay.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to discuss why electric mobility is so important in China. I think many of you know that China is still suffering serious air pollution. And with a growing vehicle suffering on the road, and we know that vehicle emissions are contributing significantly to local air pollutants. So just several weeks ago, Beijing issued their local PM 2.5 resources appointment result. 46% come from the vehicles. So you could imagine if we really want to protect the human health and clean up the air, we have to done a lot to clean up the vehicle emissions. So that's just one angle. Today we are all talking about carbon peaking and carbon neutrality as well. This is also the ambitious target for the nation. In order to achieve the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets, there is no doubt some sectors have to move faster. Especially when we look at carbon neutrality, which means almost zero emissions. So technology breakthrough is the fundamental issue. Otherwise, it's difficult to achieve that. So let's look at all different sectors. Definitely the transportation sector, all vehicles, one of the sectors which are most promising to achieve zero emissions in the future. So that's, I think, the straightforward reasons for us to work very ambitious to support cities and nations to achieve 100% EVs by some date. I think that's human health, air quality, and carbon targets for the global and for the nation.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you also making the link with the air pollution PM, because we don't have to forget that many countries around the world are struggling with air quality in their cities and with rising small particulates. And of course, when the vehicle fleets are growing, these air pollution issues are going to be bigger. I live in Nairobi, Kenya. We have a fleet doubling every 8 years. Every 8 years, the fleet doubles, and also every 8 years, the air pollution doubles. So I think electric mobility is definitely not only a solution for climate change, but also one for air pollution. So thank you for those general comments. I think questions are already coming in. I already see a few. Please keep coming, your questions. We take note of them and we come back to them to the panel. But before we go to your questions, I want to ask a little bit more about some of the things that the panel members just said and zoom in a little bit of some of the interventions they've made. So Angela, we have now the situation that the global north is moving very quickly. Some countries, the leading countries have 50%, including in Scandinavia, where I think you come from, at least where IKEA comes from. They are moving to 40–50% of their cars already being electric. So things are moving very quickly. But it's not so much the case in the global south. And we still have a lot of things to do. How do you see the COP26, and you're involved in the COP26 and the team of the COP26, playing a role in ensuring we have a global approach and we meet those global targets that we meet for Paris? Angela.
I think there's a lot being done, but I think even more remains to be done. And I think we need to be a bit humble about that fact. Obviously, when it comes to the global north, the discussion is very much focused on new vehicle sales, new car sales. And we see the OEMs coming out with new commitments and targets, and governments enforcing bans, etc. But I think we need to keep in mind that there will be no global silver bullet solution. New car sales is just one piece of the puzzle that we're trying to put together here. And mobility looks very, very different in different parts of the world. So if we look at the South specifically, the discussion is much more today focused on public transportation, for instance, much more around buses than new cars. We're working very much in Latin America. We're creating a transition playbook for Latin America that we hope to launch at COP, that we will then also be able to use as a building block for the next incoming COP team to start working on, especially considering it will be in Africa. So we're starting to pull together all those building blocks, hopefully being able to utilize also some of the fantastic work that UNEP is doing. I think also when we talk about the South, we have to broaden the discussion. It cannot be about new vehicle sales. We need to talk about 2- and 3-wheelers. We need to talk about the role of retrofitting. We need to talk about informal transportation systems and what that means. So it is different, and solving transport and reaching a carbon neutral transport industry and sector and mobility for everyone will require local solutions. The important thing is that sustainability in transportation and mobility needs to be for everyone. It needs to be affordable, available, and sustainable for everyone. Because if there's one thing we know is that climate change is not fair. Air pollution most definitely is not fair. If you live in disadvantaged communities, you will most definitely suffer more from these things. We're also going to have to see collaboration between North and South. If we want to avoid the issues we know we have in front of us, like, for instance, ice dumping in the South, as the North transitions to electric vehicles, where will all our ICE vehicles go? So we need to harmonize.
And ice doesn't mean ice cream, but ice means internal combustion engines.
Sorry,
right?
yes. As we buy new fancy electric vehicles in Europe, where will all our combustion engine vehicles go? So we also need to collaborate between North and South, make sure that we regulate import, export, to make sure that we don't just move a problem from the North to the South. And I think this is where COP can play a big part, and the work we're trying to do in ensuring that the transition to zero emission transport is fair, that it's a just transition for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks for the COP team, because I think this is the first time that the COP is seriously looking at transportation and mobility. In past COPs, there hasn't been so much focus on the issue of transportation and the need for a shift to zero emissions mobility than it has been in this COP. So I think this COP is really set the standard for addressing the issue for needing to look at the transport sector. And also thank you for addressing the issue of used vehicles. When we were looking at the data that Timo just presented, the increasing number of electric vehicles, quite coincidentally or not, I don't know, but the number of electric vehicles being introduced in developed countries currently is about the same as the export of old internal combustion engines from developed to developing countries. And that
Probably
doesn't
not
surprise
a
us, because as we
coincidence.
saw earlier, the fleets. Yes, okay. You think it's not a coincidence because the fleets in developed countries are saturated, and therefore, you know, you add, but you need also look at the other side. So thank you for making that connection. Patrick, you mentioned already that climate change is a serious threat to your country, like any country, but specifically small island developing state, it is very much a serious threat for your country. And you already talked a little bit about what you're doing. Maybe you can give us a bit more details and outline your plans, how you plan to lead by example with shifting to electric mobility. And specifically, knowing that you're a small island developing state, what support do you expect from the international community? What support do you expect from the COP, from UNEP, from all of us to be able to make that switch and to implement the plans that you have in the Seychelles to switch to electric mobility? Patrick?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joao. As I've mentioned, and you've stated, we are very vulnerable as an island state, and with the change in climate. And with the increase in temperature rise, definitely we have sea level rises, and we are having more surges of waves that are creating a lot of destructions on our coastline. And this is of very good concern for us. And you can see that most of our roads are on the coastline themselves, and they are in serious threat to this. And we are seeing us ending up with putting in place mitigating measures, but also implement infrastructure. And we started with less light infrastructures, but again, this does not work in most instances. And we have to see ourselves putting up hard structures like concrete walls along the beach, which will definitely affect the aesthetics and the beautiful beaches that we have. So this is of great concern. We've even lost infrastructures, houses, buildings in the process. And this is continuing. So this is of utmost concern that we have. So what we intend to do is to introduce stricter measures, regulations to restrict the developments along the shorelines, have them have recesses way back so as to put less pressure on our sand dunes that are being affected. We also put in place measures to stop reclamation, deforestation, and no reclamation of our wetlands, and limit the construction on the coastlines. However, we do face a lot of challenges with being dependent on the importation of fossil fuel. So the other measures is putting in place mechanism that will encourage people to move to environmentally friendly vehicles and put in place the incentive that I've mentioned previously. We also, to minimize the emission, we have put in place strong regulation on the importation of vehicles, mainly for light vehicles, cars, light vehicles. We do not allow second-hand vehicles to enter into the country. We allow only more heavier vehicles for commercial use, pickup trucks and so on, but with certain restrictions on the age that we will allow to enter into the country. So one of our problems that we face right now is we do have quite a substantial amount of vehicles, environmentally friendly and more electric vehicles. But our challenge is there is no monitoring process in place for us to monitor the efficacy of these vehicles, how their performance are. We just have word of mouth from the owners, how the vehicles are performing and so on. So no work is being done. With that GEF project that we have embarked on, this will give us more monitoring facilities and put in place mechanism to address that. So we have set a target to reduce our carbon footprint by 2040 to an acceptable level, and with the intention to encourage more environmentally friendly vehicles. We have embarked on a more, I can say, project to turn one of our islands, which is Ladig, to electric vehicles totally. Presently, the island now has 50% of their vehicle fleet electric. And we are trying now, with that project coming on, we are trying to see how we will move to remove and replace the other vehicles with more environmentally friendly vehicles. Thank you for now. If there are any other questions, I will be so happy to continue to. But coming back with how we will need assistance, okay? Definitely, our biggest area is with capacity building. So we need assistance on expert to train our locals with regards for the maintenance of such technology that is being presented to us. We have big problems even with the motor manufacturers overseas, that they are not willing at this point to send the electric vehicles into Seychelles because we don't have a plan or we cannot dispose of the batteries themselves, which is of great concern. Also, we need, like I say, We are embarking on buses now for a trial period, but also we need demonstration vehicles in medium-sized pickup trucks, because this is one of the methods that we use in our construction industry, which creates a lot of environment. So if we can have assistance along these lines and experts that can help us, that will be of great benefit to us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think you outline possibly the challenges that every country, at least every African country, at least a small country, has. Monitoring, information, awareness, piloting, not only buses, but also other piloting. What do we do with the batteries when they need to be disposed? So I think, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. There's already some questions for you coming in. I'll come back to those in a moment, but let's go first to Gong. And Gong, are you still there? I think I see you still sitting there, so you're still there. Gong, so we saw it. China is leading the world, for example, with electric buses. And China is one of the countries that is electrifying rapidly, and you explained earlier why. And so my question to you is, what can other countries learn from China on the uptake of electric mobility, especially other developing countries? And how can they work with China and cooperate with China to also follow the example of China? For example, electrifying the buses. I mean, I see all over Africa and Latin America and also Asia, a lot of cities building bus systems for mass transport. How can we make sure those buses are electric and not diesel? So what can we learn from China, and how can you help us? Over to you, Gong.
Okay, I will try my best to answer your questions. When we look at the history of China EV development in the past almost 20 years, we try to summarize some experience which might be useful to other countries. First is, China tried to develop the medium and long-term targets as soon as possible. We know that such kind of medium and long-term guiding targets would help build the consensus among different stakeholders, including manufacturers, including governments, including research organizations, charging service providers, whatever related stakeholders. Without such kind of guiding targets, the synergy would be very big, and people are always arguing whether it's good or not good, whether it's environment or not environment friendly, something like that. But we need actions. So those kinds of medium and long-term targets would really help to resolve those kinds of arguments and build the synergies and collaborations. Second, in fact, China is a very big country, and in order to have a kind of national mandate targets since the beginning, that could be quite challenging. And also we know that technology is always evolving and keep improving. Before they get mature, it's very important to have some kind of demonstration and pilots. So that's also why, starting from 2009, the ministries in China started working with different cities to initiate the 10 city, 1,000 vehicle pilot program. And because of that program, you all know that at the beginning, there was no suppliers, no manufacturers, and even no demand. But because of these pilot programs, the government successfully built the collaborations between supply side and the demand side. And also through the partnership, the national government work together with local governments to continue to collaborate on this important direction. So that's the second experience I would like to say, that the demo and the pilot and to inspire local actions, not just the national actions, are very important. Third, I think is when we're talking about the EV, most people will say, oh, they are very expensive, right? And that's for sure, especially at the beginning. But I think financial incentives is important, but not all of them. So that's why the third experience in China, in fact, is try to develop fiscal policies as well as non-fiscal policies. So today we have a kind of topic related to urban, regional, and global, national, something like that. So different levels of governments have different policy options. And not just incentives, but also like traffic restriction and zero emission zone, ultra low emission zone, And also from the national government, the Chinese ministries also developed their mandate policy, which has experience in learning from the California's their program. So that's all is a kind of policies metrics which help China to move fast. So back to the question about buses. I think when we're talking about electric buses, we are almost focusing on diesel pollution and sometimes about carbon, but we know diesel trucks, diesel buses are very noisy. So in order to get support from the public, in fact, once we use the electric buses along the streets, all the residential area close to the streets feel, okay, the streets get much quieter. Not just in the day, but also at night especially. So all these kind of public participants and support are also important to support the bus electrification in China. Of course, it's also related to industry, competitiveness, all these kind of things. Different countries may have different choices, but we all know that China is a global leading country in terms of not just electric vehicles, but also for the whole auto market. So such a big auto market really help drives down the cost and help build a mature supply chain. All these technology, supply chain, and products could build a kind of support for other countries globally to move faster. So we already see that many international automakers have Chinese market as the #1 or biggest market for them for their global business. So I think that they could bring these technologies and products to other countries as well to support the other countries. So that's my short answer to your question.
Okay, I think there's much more to discuss, but I want to go to some of the questions in the audience and put them to the panel members. And panel members, you've been reading along, I hope, with me, so I don't miss anything, because there's a number of questions come in already, and please keep them coming, everybody. But maybe the first question that I want to ask goes to Patrick. And that question is, taxation, is it working? How did people respond to different taxation? How do they respond to when you increase the taxations on petrol vehicles and you decrease the taxation on electric vehicles? Taxation measures. What's your response, Patrick, on that?
Okay, thank you for that question. As we all know, definitely once such a move is done in the first instance, there will be an outcry. But once you explain to the public what is the reason behind the increase in tax on conventional vehicles with regards to environmentally friendly vehicles, they understand the rationale. And also, as it is important to note, we have an environmental program from the school. At an early age, students, our children, are being taught about environment. So they grow up with that in their mind, so that they will help as they grow up to preserve our environment. And these are passed on. And also we have a lot of sensitization through the media with regards to the impact that the environment is happening. And also the actual result that we see on ground makes people more cautious. Like I've mentioned earlier, the coastal erosion, when we educate them to understand why are these happening, what we are doing to contribute towards these things happening, then you find that they accept when such measures are being put in place. Our only problem is we are trying to ensure that the cost of these environmentally friendly vehicles comes to a lower cost to the conventional vehicles, so that it makes it easier for the transition from conventional to environmentally friendly vehicles. And further to that, we've looked at what are the incentives that is being put in or is put in place or is being considered to be put in place. Is like I've mentioned with our Ladig Island project for the people that has the conventional a bargain with them for exchange. This is the proposal that is being put in place, but it still needs to be approved by central government.
Okay, thank you. Very good to hear about how you're dealing with this whole education and awareness already from small children's age, and that makes it easier to introduce those measures. But taxation is only one measure, and some countries may find, low-income countries may find it quite difficult to provide those subsidies that some of the developed countries provide. So Angela, some people are asking, there are measures in the whole set that we have that can work also for our others in addition to, or rather instead of providing big subsidies. Any experience on your side about other interventions that could work?
I think we need to understand that a transition takes funding. There's no way about it. There will need to be investments. I think we must also remember the alternative cost of not investing in sustainable measures, right? It's sometimes we get so stuck in the fact that charging infrastructure will require investment, that an electric vehicle is 3 times more expensive. But it depends on whose account you're looking at. If you take into account also the health impacts, the fact that 7 to 8 million people die of air pollution every day, 1/3 of all strokes, lung cancer, heart attacks comes from air pollution. I think the cost is not that massive. So, and we rarely consider the cost of oil production when we consider a vehicle. So I think we need to slightly change the perspective. We need to invest in our future. That is what we need to do, a future for everyone. And so I think businesses has a large role to play in transitioning their operations. I think governments have a large role to play. And unfortunately, Anthony isn't here, but also organizations such as his supporting this transition. And I think we will see a start at COP. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say, but there will be something at COP that I hope can act as sort of a starting point for funneling investments to the global south for this transition.
Well, that's great news. And you've been bombarded as the ambassador for this in the comments. So you have now a new task on your shoulders.
I will do my absolute best to do it. And of course, this is part of the discussion. We know we need to see these investments. And this is one of the areas where we realize that you can never work in silos. You can't just look at the transport industry, right, because the transport industry isn't like this anymore. We need to engage with the energy industry. We need to engage with the whole investor community. And we are. So I'm hoping we will definitely not get all the way there by COP26, but this is not a sprint, right? It used to be a marathon. We don't have that much time left, but say a half marathon then. So I hope COP can be really a starting point for many of these things. And I hope a year from now, as we're getting closer to COP27, that the deliverables are really coming in and that we see these in very tangible assets being set for this.
Okay, that's all very promising and sounds very good. So we'll be watching you and working with you to make this happen. Maybe from the UNEP perspective, to add to this question, working in more than 50 projects on electric mobility in low and middle income countries, yes, financing is a big issue, but we also find there is actually a lot of institutions around the world that are ready to finance the shift to electric mobility, but they miss the right project yet. So we find there's also a disconnect between the financing institutions in the world that are key to finance climate, including mobility, and the current projects, current project programs, current roadmaps that are being developed or still are being developed in low and middle income countries. And so one of the things we intend to do, including with this regional support and investment platform, is actually bringing the demand, for example, the demand for new buses for mass transport in Africa, together with those that are supplying the solutions, both in technology and in finance. So I think I think finance is there. We just need to make sure that it fits well to the projects that are now being developed. Thank you, Angela. Gong, there's a question, a very first question about the, and somebody else, some other people brought it up also, Patrick brought it up, how to deal with new challenges that come with electric mobility. For example, batteries, where they come to the end of life. And Gong, given that China was one of the leading and first introducers of electric mobility, you mentioned in 2009, you started the first projects in cities. Do you know, can you give us a bit of information what these technical challenges are? There's a question about electric vehicles catching fire. Is this a real issue? There were some comments and questions about what do we do with the batteries once those electric vehicles come to the end of life. Gong, can you say something about this?
That's a very good question. And in fact, that's a very big uncertainty we are trying to figure out. That's not just related to the end of life recycling issue, but also related to how we could develop enough resources to support 100% EV in future. So again, when we're talking about this battery issue, normally we pay attention to how to recycle environment friendly to reduce the potential risks. So now the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, as well as the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, both of them are trying to have a better monitoring and tracking system about the batteries, where they're once they are produced and how they are used, and when they are going to come to the end of life, and try to mandate and require those batteries are to be either have a second life, like we use a kind of energy storage, or just coming to the end of life, like what you mentioned. But anyway, no matter what kind of batteries, the final solution is how to get them recycled environment friendly and efficiently. So that's the way how Ministry of Ecology and Environment could play a very important role. So far, they are also developed a kind of guideline and technical regulations in terms of how to recycle them and also avoid any potential risk during the transportation process, storage process. We know that the battery has still energy inside. So if you cannot handle correctly, that could even create some risks like fire accidents and create other risks. So again, I think that's a very good question. But and this question, in fact, is also not just linked related to China. It's a global question. If Europe, US, China, and any other countries are all trying to achieve a kind of 100 EV by certain date, like 2035 or 2040, whether we have enough resources to support that, how we are going to build our reliable supply chain environmentally and efficiently. So all these questions have to be built, conversations, collaborations among different countries. I think that's an area with different countries to collaborate and work more together in the future.
Okay, I think we definitely need that collaboration, and we also need the leadership from China and sharing their lessons, because these are some of the main questions that indeed countries are asking us. And we have a few minutes left, and questions are still coming in. So I also encourage the panel members to answer the question in the chat box. I just want to give all the panel members 1 minute to some things that they would like to say that they feel haven't been said or they would like to emphasize before we can close up. But if you can please stick to 1 minute, I can hand over back to Mr. Zhang in time. Maybe we start with you, Angela. COP26, what happens after COP26?
I think what I would like to emphasize is really the need for policy. Yes, we need the non-state actors to be responsible, but the accelerator is really policy. Nothing puts speed into operations like good old-fashioned bans, basically, or incentives. So I think we need a policy that takes a stand and sets the direction and sets the timeline, because I think we must remember that we are not on a tech development timeline. We are not on a financial sense timeline. We are on a climate timeline. And that's the speed we need to act according to. And all other considerations are really mute.
Yeah, we're on a Save the World timeline, I would say.
Exactly.
So thank you. Yes, and thank you making the point. Policy is needed, and I fully agree with you. And so that's something that that we're trying to do with many of these countries. Patrick, anything you wanted to add briefly, if you can?
I support Angela in what she has just mentioned, but at the same time, it is good for the manufacturers of such vehicles to create a mechanism whereby they can also assist with the taking back of these batteries, either for recycling purposes, so that it does not become a burden for any country for that matter, but especially for small countries like ours. I think there should be a correlation or a better engagement from the manufacturers of such vehicles and their respective representative in each country that sells their vehicle. So to facilitate and make that collaboration a bit better, so that we have a peace of mind as to how we will deal with this waste that comes out, so that we do not throw it back into the environment. Thank you for that.
Thank you, very good. And as I mentioned before, under the new global program on electric mobility, there's one working group looking at this issue. Battery afterlife is headed by the International Energy Agency. So sources will become available to you and to other countries to address these questions on taxation, but also questions on afterlife, questions on policy. So definitely we'd like to, we're working already with Seychelles. Seychelles Islands, of course, are part of our program, but we definitely are going to develop some of these tools, because we only understand these questions are quite key to make success. Gong, over to you. Anything else you want to mention before we close up? Again, thanking the hosts, SAE, for this panel.
Yeah, thanks for moderating and asking all these great questions. I probably share the final 3 points. One is even today in China, only 10% of sales are new energy vehicles, which means that we still should keep tightening the tailpipe emission standards as well as the fuel economy standards for ICE vehicles. That's more than 90% of sales even today. Second is when we think about how to support the electrification, don't just think about incentivize vehicles, but also treat infrastructure as one system. That should be treated as together to sometimes charging infrastructure to even leading the development of EV. Third, in fact, we are talking about the electric mobility, which is not just vehicles. Again, I like the idea, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, and even electric trucks are all also very, very important for their emissions in the future.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for reminding us that we talk about electric mobility, but we need to keep the pressure on the emissions of the internal combustion engine, not only to reduce their fuel consumption and reduce their pollutant emissions, but also to make sure we have a good transition to electric mobility. It needs to come from both sides. Angela already mentioned the used vehicles, etc. So I think that's a very important point. Thank you. So let me wrap up by saying a big thanks to the panel members. I think we had a great session. I think we covered most of the questions. Thank you for being brief and to the point. I think it was very clear. Also, as a final word from UNEP, thank you to the organizers. We had to start. UNEP is launching its global program, working in 50+ countries, developing tools, working with financiers. Angela's now going to help organize the COP. The COP is also a start, as she talked about it. So there's many opportunities for all of us to work together to support. We don't have time to lose. As we said earlier, and we showed earlier, we need to do this in the next couple of years. But today's session to me has given me the hope and trust that that we're getting there with the things that we need to make this transition possible. Thank you very much again, and done back end of panel 1.
Thank you all. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and a big thanks to all the panelists. It's a good discussion, and we did hear a lot of opinion on the practice. Thank you again. Now we move to panel 2, the regional initiatives to accelerate the introduction of electric vehicles. The moderator will be Mrs. Lu from China, the China Director of Clean Air Asia. Mrs. Fu, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, now we move to the second session, zoom into regional initiatives. Thank you, UNEP as the organizer, for the invitation to be the moderator. My name is Fulu, the China Director of Clean Air Asia, a regional non-for-profit NGO based in Asia with the vision of Asia without air pollution. And in this panel, we have 4 distinguished speakers. Actually, we follow the same format of the first session, 2 parts. Each speaker will introduce briefly their work related to electric mobility, and the second part will be me to ask questions to the panelists. And then finally, we'll open the floor to the audience to raise questions. I'll introduce each speaker before they speak. And so now let's begin the first part. First, we'll invite Ms. Jane Akumu. She's the Program Officer with the Sustainable Mobility Unit of UNEP. Akumu joined UNEP in 2004, and she has been working towards environmentally sustainable transport in Africa. So, Akumu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. So my introduction is on how regional. Do I go straight to the regional? How regional collaboration? Okay. So I'll give the example of the West Africa region. As UNEP, we have been partnering with the countries in the West Africa, and also working with the economic Economic Community of West Africa States Commission, the regional body. So we have, through, Rob already mentioned a bit of that, through the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, we have worked with 14 of the 15 West African countries to support them to look at the kind of vehicles they are importing over time, what kind of vehicles in terms of fuel economy, the trends, and also to do policy review so that the countries can see, are they importing cleaner, are they importing more fuel economy vehicles? And of course, the main findings have been that over time, the countries are importing less efficient vehicles and not cleaner vehicles. At the same time, also collaborating with the regional economic body, the ECOWAS Commission, we supported the sub-region to develop a regional fuel economy roadmap. And this roadmap was approved last year in September by the ministers of the sub-region, and it includes some targets on electric mobility. So what are the main lessons that we've learned about regional collaboration or working at regional level? So one of the things I would say is that sub-regions face similar challenges and similar opportunities. The East Africa is different from the West Africa sub-region, is also different from, let's say, the Southern Africa sub-region. So sub-regions are facing similar challenges and opportunities. So working at sub-regional level, we are able to have countries move or migrate faster towards cleaner mobility. You know, for example, with that regional fuel economy roadmap, you know, that has targets towards electric mobility, towards labeling, for example. So sub-regions are able to move faster. And then also the second thing that we see is that there is capacity building within the countries in that sub-region. In the West Africa sub-region, which I was giving the example, some countries are ahead when it comes to policy implementation, and others are actually lagging behind in terms of promoting cleaner and more fuel efficient vehicles. So they're able to exchange and they're able to sort of like move together as a sub-region. So that's what I would maybe say, one of the things that we've really learned looking at regional collaboration. Over to you, Fulu.
Thank you, Akuma. That's really, for me, it's first time to hear about what has been happening in African continent. The sub-regional experience is valuable. Thank you. And our second speaker in this panel is Mr. Jamie Leather. He's the Chief Transport Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. He has more than 30 years of experience in transport, and he now leads the ADB transport sector operations. Now, let's welcome Mr. Leather. Leather, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me cover Asia Pacific region on the actions that are being taken. I would stress that actions are obviously needed at the national level, the local level, as well as the personal level, but let me highlight some of the regional initiatives that are happening. I would say we're happy to be collaborating with UNEP on this global initiative, but within Asia, there's three particular bodies I'd like to highlight. One has been running for some years now. It's the Environmentally Sustainable Transport Forum, which is co-hosted or run by UNCRD and the government of Japan. And this started by looking at local air quality issues related to transport. So it was one of the few meetings across the region that brought together transport ministries with environmental ministries to look at them more on the local pollution issues. Over time, that has evolved to a much greater level and looking at global emissions as well, particularly on climate change. And there was a Bangkok declaration which many of the governments in the region had signed up to promote and deliver sustainable low carbon transport. And that expires this year. There will be a new Aichi declaration that will be discussed at the upcoming meeting next year. So that is the Environmentally Sustainable Transport Forum that has been running for around 15 years now. The second one is much newer. It is a Council for Decarbonisation of Transport in Asia, and that was established by GIZ, the German government, and has involved over 100 specialists looking at policy issues, NDCs issues relating to transport, but also a number of pilot studies in terms of actually implementing things on the ground. And the final thing I wanted to mention, which is going back some years now, I think maybe one of the first transport and climate change, was the establishment of SLOCAT. And I do see a number of people in this meeting who were perhaps there at the very early stages, way back in 2009 in Bellagio, when the need for a body to consider transport's role in climate change was being discussed, and that led to the establishment of SLOCAT. My final words: a lot of these bodies are really looking at raising awareness, and I think once that awareness is raised, we start to see the action. And I think the previous session highlighted really how much action has been taken, and representing the Asian region here, a lot of that action is being taken in Asia, particularly when you look at 2- and 3-wheelers and public transport vehicles. I'm very optimistic about wholesale decarbonisation of transport, and I think Asia will be leading a lot of that, as they already are, but not so much in the 4-wheel vehicles, but certainly in the 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers and e-buses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leather. Yeah, I myself have attended the Asia Transport Forum, and I do agree with you here in Asian countries that everything started from awareness being raised. Thank you, Leather. And our third speaker is Mr. Philip Good. He's the Associate Professor, a Director at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Philip, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, and hello everyone. Thanks very much for the invite to speak today. It's a great pleasure to talk to you about this really important and also very interesting subject. First, I'd just like to start with a few words about EBRD, about what it is, who we are and what we do. So we're a development bank that focuses on Central Europe, Central Asia and North Africa. Relative to other development banks, we have a slightly different mandate in that we focus specifically on private sector and supporting private sector development and the transition towards market economies. We're increasingly becoming a very green bank because we now have an ambitious target for 2025 that 50% of all of our investments that we undertake each year will be green. And so that has big consequences for what it is we do and the investments and priorities that we have. So therefore, when we come to our transport work, investment in e-mobility and supporting our countries of operation on the transition towards clean vehicle systems, transport systems, is central to our mandate and central to where we want to go with our investments. So far we've been fairly active across the chain. So it's most of the largest investments that we've made have been in the area related to manufacturing. So battery manufacturing in particular, and also some of the vehicle manufacturing. But we're seeing increasing need or increasing numbers of projects coming through, particularly in public transport and electric buses. That's definitely a key area of investment. And we're active in other areas such as passenger cars, charging infrastructure, and also end of life are areas also where we have sort of investment plans in place. So that's a very brief introduction. In terms of some of the themes today, I'd just like to flag that from our side, we see the whole policy context and policy environment in our countries of operation as absolutely critical to supporting investment. It is fundamental in terms of that supporting both the economics of projects, but also the sort of the confidence of investors and the ability for us to structure investment. So from our side, you know, this fascinating discussion we're having on policy and the drivers, I think is really critical. And for that reason, you know, we welcome very much the GEF e-mobility program, and are delighted to be participating in this with the other agencies of which are represented here today, because we see that this type of initiative will be really important in supporting the transition and enabling us to make the investments that are needed. So thank you. I'll stop there for the moment. And
thank you, Mr. Good. I really like the term you say. Ebrd is a great bank. Financing definitely very important for developing electric mobility. Thank you. And the fourth speaker is Mr. Mandam Rakmi. Dr. Rakmi is the Economic Affairs Officer with UNEP. He has over 30 years of national and international experience in the areas of sustainable development, urban mobility, climate change impacts, and sustainable assessment. Dr. Rakmi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lou. And then ISCAP, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia. We are actually the regional commission of the United Nations. So we cover actually Asia Pacific region in the 63 countries. So we have actually the regional cooperation is one of our mandate. So in terms of the transport sector, all the senior transport officials as well as the ministers actually convene every 5 years, and for the senior official every 2 years. And they discuss about the issues of the importance of those, you know, the sustainable transport, inclusiveness, and now more on the energy efficiency. And then actually we are trying to look at the, you know, the shift toward the electric mobility, as we see on the first session and earlier session. Actually, in the Asia Pacific region, there has been more move toward, I think, maybe the private vehicles and 2- and 3-wheeler. But I think there need to be a more shift about the public transport. Actually, we are actually advocating those, and then the shift to the public transport as well as the electric public transport. Actually, we just have initiated a project actually on the piloting in some of the country. So as we say, I think there are the, you know, many things. I think the commitment is there. Actually, they have made the commitment to the, you know, Paris Agreement as well as in the NDCs. But actually, there is a little bit gap between those commitment to implement to the ground level. So what they need, I think, those type of supports to have a, you know, national EV policy and strategy, as well as the operational strategy. And then China, I think, is leading. Actually, you heard more about the China. They have done more on the public transport as well. So we actually trying to do, and then this bring in this Chinese experience as to the other city. And then another important aspect about the Asian cities are, there are actually the many countries, they are having high share of the renewable energy. Just like if you take the Laos, Nepal, maybe Georgia, or some other country in Central Asia, they have really the high share of the hydroelectricity in the energy, and really there is a more room for the push toward the electric mobility on all the vehicle fleet, as well as more on the public transport. So we are working on that, and then our actually ministerial conference is coming in December, and we are putting some agenda to the minister table. So maybe I'll update more on those in the next part. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rakni. Now we'll go into the second part of this session. We have prepared 2 rounds of questions to the panelists. And the first question actually to all panelists is about, you have all been working in the sustainable mobility for many years. Can you give us an example where regional collaboration advanced the introduction of clean mobility, and what we can learn from this in this shift to electric mobility? Jane Akumu.
Thank you. Just to maybe echo the work that we've done in Africa, we've supported over 30 countries within the sub-region to look at, as I mentioned, under the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, to look at the kind of vehicles that are being imported. And this has been an eye-opener for a lot of the countries because, a lot of the countries do not know, the kind of vehicles they are importing. Are they cleaner? Are they more fuel efficient? So once we supported the countries to do that, they're able to see where the gaps are and what needs to be done. For example, one of the countries that we did support, did not had some fiscal measures. Uganda had some fiscal measures they were calling it an environmental levy to disincentivize import of very old and dirty vehicles. But on the contrary, once we supported them to look at, the vehicles being imported, the technologies, they actually found out that they are really importing very old vehicles, very inefficient vehicles, which were going, to cost the country in terms of air pollution and in terms of also fuel economy, and of course, contributing eventually to climate change. So with this, the country itself was able to come up with some policy incentives, some age restriction. So I think it's important for countries to know exactly what kind of vehicle technologies are in the countries. And I think that's a big eye opener towards supporting more cleaner, more fuel efficient vehicles. And so from that, we're seeing more countries moving towards the electric mobility after we supported them on these studies. Over to you.
Thank you. And Mr. Letta.
Thank you very much. I just want to echo what Philip said. All of the multilateral development banks have been working towards their greening of their portfolio. Our president at the Asian Development Bank recently announced that all of ADB assistance from 2023 onwards would be Paris Agreement aligned. So we will be Paris aligned in the next 2 years, which will have an implication on not just transport, but all of our sector assistance, both for mitigation and adaptation. So that seems to be the way that the financial support is being provided, certainly through the multilateral development banks. I would also say that transport is an enabler of development, and to lift people out of poverty and to see that continued economic growth, it inevitably will mean more people want to travel and more goods are being shipped. But we are, in some of the research, seeing a decoupling between economic growth and transport related emissions, CO2. So for example, if economic growth is growing at say 10%, we're seeing transport related growth of CO2 emissions much lower than that, which has changed over time, so say 5%. So we are seeing a significant divergence between economic growth, demand for travel, and the emissions that are associated. So there is already evidence of cleaning up across the transport that has been providing over the last 2 to 3 decades. Knowledge is very important, I think. We have produced a report in 2019 looking at e-mobility options within developing member countries across Asia and the Pacific. And this was looking at the vehicle types, the power grid factors, the policy issues, and a whole range of factors that would allow that transition, or highlighting areas that need to be addressed or changed to ensure that there can be a smooth transition or a more rapid uptake of that shift to e-mobility. And later this year, we will produce a similar knowledge product on e-mobility, but focusing more in the urban areas. So we'll be looking at a number of cities across Asia and the Pacific and highlighting pathways or development maps for a shift to e-mobility. And I think it is in the urban area where we see the lowest hanging fruit. And so some of the examples, we're providing direct support at project level, in addition to the policy or knowledge support. I would now say that all of our urban transport support looks at non-motorized and e-vehicle options as part of the project preparation activities. We've supported trolley buses in Shandong, Davao in the Philippines, a full-scale fleet renewal program looking at modernization of that, an e-tricycle project also in the Philippines, but a number of metro projects or bus projects across Pakistan, Georgia, Thailand, India, Mongolia, China, many countries, but also fleet renewal programs. And this is going beyond just the sort of public transport, looking at taxi fleets. So our private sector arm provided support in Jakarta to look at taxi firms and private bus operators out to the airport. In India, we have looked at supporting and implemented a shift in a vehicle fleet of over 500 vehicles to e-vehicles. And again, in the Philippines, looking at a number of different other shifts. One final thing I'd like to say is, in addition to the non-motorized and public transport and fleets, we have been looking at electrification of boats, ferries, localized sort of urban transport on water, and starting to consider the much broader challenge perhaps of the international maritime and international aviation subsectors as well, but definitely focusing in the initial stages on the lower hanging fruits, which are very much around urban areas. I think it was said already, the sort of distances that are traveled and the type of vehicles that are used, and the makeup of Asian cities, very, very large, very dense. The types of trips there are much more relevant in terms of that shift with the type of vehicle and the trip patterns that we see. So again, supporting many of our countries, but particularly in this stages in the urban sector of transport, but looking at the other terms, and I think that will come in the next few years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Data. I think you shared the EDB support to sustainable mobility in the region. I guess in the second round of questions, I would like you to talk more about what the role regional collaboration play in these successful cases. Thank you. And next, Philip Good, could you share your view what happened in Europe? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question about the way that the regional collaboration can support in the transition. And there's a couple of examples, I think, from a sort of European perspective, or the countries that we work in, which I think are really, really, really interesting. And in some ways, it's going to depend very much on the context about how replicable they are, whether whether these sorts of approaches are transferable to other parts of the world. But one thing that we're very active is in some of our areas of operations, the Western Balkan states, and the Western Balkan states are many of them are relatively small, and they're all sort of quite closely connected. But increasingly, they're working together on transport policy. And I mean, traditionally, this is in things like planning highways and making sure that you've got a sort of a good network across the region, connecting the countries in the best ways. And what's interesting, we're now beginning to see is that this collaboration between countries on planning of highways is now evolving into additional features like planning of fast charging infrastructure for those highways and ensuring that there's a cross-regional network. I mean, this is very early stages, but it's one of the things which the countries are looking at, and it may, they'll be using the sort of the frameworks they have for working with each other to address these issues. The idea being very simple: when you've got the cross-border highways, you want to ensure that if you're going to have cross-border traffic that's electric, you need to make sure that you've got the charging infrastructure in the right places to enable those transit flows. So I think from that for me is a really interesting example, which I think is really relevant when you've got sort of small interconnected countries where they have such networks. I think another thing thing I've noticed is that you do see sort of cooperation and collaboration around vehicles and fuel standards as well. And I think in the past that's been really important in terms of cleaning up fossil fuel vehicles, the internal combustion engine, in terms of fuel standards and catalysts introduction. And those sorts of work between countries, sort of learning from each other, understanding what sort of good practices are, looking at what standards to introduce. That sort of dialogue and discussion, I think, has direct relevance to e-mobility and the transition from fossil fleets to EVs, because I think that sort of peer-to-peer learning and understanding about the sort of regulatory requirements and what makes sense is hugely beneficial and can really develop some really rich experience and sort of exchange of information between different countries. So I think those were sort of a couple of things I've noted from our side.
Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Rackney.
Yeah, okay, thank you again. As I said earlier, actually, we are focusing more on the public transport in the urban area. So one of the actually initiative we have is that to advocate this, I think trying to have a national transition policy to electric mobility, have a national stakeholder consultation in some of the pilot countries. And then as we discussed earlier, I think bringing those in-country experience at the regional level. So we are planning to have some regional consultation in the next year. So currently, actually, we are supporting Georgia, Thailand, Laos, and Nepal. And then I see on the UNEP also, I think they have some sort of this, but our more focus is on the public vehicle, like not the two-wheeler and three-wheeler, but the focus on those type of things. And then after this, having the national consultation and what are there and trying to bring all the stakeholders, I think energy, transport, and the private sector operator as well as the transport operator as well. And then having the national strategy as well as the operational strategy, at least I think they're initiating those discussions and implementing those. And then when we come at the regional level, actually similar to what actually UNEP presented at the global level, I think there was already some discussion about having some regional support financing or investment mechanism. So we are also thinking about the Asia Pacific Regional Initiative for the electric mobility. I think it is a non-voluntary, I think, the commitment from the countries as well as other development partners and even other private sector stakeholders, because ISCAP is usually known for the intergovernmental cooperation and there is a commitment from the government, but these were actually, we are trying to make it broader. And then hopefully, I think then by next year, we'll have this initiative, and then we really invite other partners to join this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rackney. Before I start asking the second round of questions, I'll like to remind the audience to encourage you to ask questions in the chat box. If we're gonna have time left in this session, we'll pick up the questions from the chat box. For the second round of questions, I'd like to start from Dr. Rackney, because you just introduced the regional coordination in Asia. So we know that commitment and coordination at the highest political level is very key to bring the e-mobility in a region. So based on your work experience, in UNEP. How do ministers respond when the issue of electric mobility is brought up? And how is UNEP supporting the process of integrating e-mobility into the regional sustainable development agenda? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is a very, very good transition. Thank you very much. Actually, we mentioned also, I think the electric, if we look at the review, the nationally determined contribution that is to the Paris Agreement, actually electric mobility actually feature as one of the top policy among the Asian, the countries, and they have those things and commitment to. And then it links to the, I think, SDG 7, that is energy transition as well as the mobility, and then in the climate change. And as I said, I think, but there is really there is a commitment, and there are a lot of actually the announcement at the national level. Okay, they have those commitment, and then they have, just like in Nepal also, in the recent budget, I think they announced that they will have a electric bus in Kathmandu, as well as they will have this about 100 charging station in the Laos and other. So there are so many policy initiatives, but still I think that is not translated to the ground level. And what we have done is that actually, as I said, that we are having this ministerial conference in December. So we are putting more on the emphasis on the low carbon mobility as well as the electric mobility. And these two initiatives actually are part of the, I think, the declaration with the minister will be adopting. So we are actually having a series of preparatory meeting, and we are having really the very good feedback. Actually, and if you talk about the public transport, actually, we heard earlier also, I think the Asia actually is leading in terms of the improving and the shifting from private to the public transport. India, you see the example in India, China, and then again, actually, the China again leading on the electric mobility, and then some initiative in the Korea as well as in China. But as we see in the other part, it is more focused on the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, as well as the private car. So we need to make a big jump about this electric mobility. And then we are putting in the agenda of the ministerial conference, and hopefully they will adopt in December. And then actually we'll follow up on this regional initiative and to advocate country about to shift to our electric mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rakmi. Next question is for Philip Good. Can you tell us more about the importance of policy making and regulation for the successful introduction of electric mobility? How is Ebrd planning to support the introduction of the technology in your partner countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great question because in my view, policy is a fundamental building block for this transition. We've got new technologies coming in, we've got new market structures which need to develop. At the moment, we're in an area where the costs are a bit higher in many cases, not all cases, but costs can be a challenge. We need new skills and capacities to be able to manage and organize these systems. And we're also, in some ways, it's a tough job for e-mobility because it's going up against the traditional transport system, which works very well, and people know how to use it. And the ICE and fossil fuel system, is very, very effective. So there's a bit of a challenge there. So I think from our side, policy is absolutely fundamental in driving change. From because the way we look at our contribution to this area is in terms of the bankability of projects and whether the project proposal that we have to invest in makes sense. So policy can be very important in terms of a number of ways, like reducing costs by encouraging market development in a certain way. And the things we talked about in some of the earlier presentations or discussion about things such as mandates, that those can be really important in changing cost structures. Another critical area as well, which has been really important in different countries, is fuel policy related to fuel prices and fuel taxation. We found it so much easier to structure e-mobility investment where there is effective energy and carbon taxation related to fossil fuels. It really, really does help shift the economic balance and financial balance. So there's a range of areas that policy is really important to help overcome barriers. I think another broad area just is in relation to some of the risks, and risk to investment is also a really big consideration for us. And one of the areas of risks is often is around capacity. And if we do make an investment, does the client have the capacity, the skills to be able to operate the transport system, to maintain it? Will they be able to respect the warranty conditions related to the vehicles? Because it may be a very sort of specific new set of requirements related to the way that you charge batteries or dispose of the end of use of life batteries or maintain the vehicles. So there's a whole series of questions there. And so policy can be really helpful in terms of skill development and building that capacity. Another area, again, in terms of risk, it really comes down more to sort of when we're investing with some of our private sector clients, is looking at their business plan and how can we have assurance that their business plan is going to be met. So, for example, we're working with a charging company at the moment, and one of the big questions for us is the assumptions that they make about the revenues from they're going to get from their charging infrastructure. The revenues will relate down to the market, the demand, and again the policy environment which is in place, which will ensure that there are vehicles on the market and there will be customers for that charging company. So I think policy for me is absolutely critical. It's a foundation for all of this, and when we get that sort of solid foundation, we can then start building the investments on top of it. So I think that gives us sort of my perspective on the importance of this area. So thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Dr. Mr. Lether, you shared some of the ADB successes with us in the first question. I want to ask about ADB's plans to support sustainable mobility and electrification in the Asian region. And also, can you touch a little bit upon the role of regional collaboration can play? Thank you.
Apologies for giving the ADB discussion earlier, but let me focus on another part of that. So in addition to the project support, we're pushing a lot more on policy support as well, and we're backing this up with results-based lending or policy-based lending in addition to the project lending. So those projects I mentioned previously, that's sort of the pilot studies, ensuring proof of concept of different vehicle types within different local environments. But I think more importantly, to have an impact at scale, very much looking at support within those policies and the shift of financing of that transition at a scale where it will have an impact. And on the regional, I mentioned in the opening remarks some of the great initiatives such as the Environmentally Sustainable Transport Forum, the Council for Decarbonisation of Transport in Asia, and SLOCAT. But I think, as Madame was saying, the getting the governments together to look at this, and I think it was mentioned earlier on, learning from each other. I think that is one area where we really do see this regional, embedding that decarbonisation of the sector in the NDCs, in the long-term strategies. I think that would be key to see that transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to Ms. Akumu, in your opinion, what is still missing when it comes to the introduction of electric mobility in the African continent? Can you please select 3 most important issues? How will the Africa support an investment platform to help tackle these challenges? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. I would say the number 1 challenge, for electric mobility in Africa would be lack of awareness about electric mobility. We've seen from the last panel, P.S. Andre from Seychelles spoke about, electric mobility and how they are encouraging that. So we have champions on electric mobility in many of the African countries. But if you look at the vast majority of the population, right from the decision makers to the general public, there isn't a lot of understanding, and they see electric mobility as a technology of the future. So in a lot of the countries that you go to talk to, they see electric mobility as not for today for the region, but it's something for the future. So awareness, I would say, would be the number 1, as I think Jamie already spoke about earlier. So awareness is the number 1 challenge. The second challenge would be a lack of enabling environment for promotion of electric mobility within the sub-region. A lot of the countries do not have standards. They also lack physical policies to promote electric mobility. And all this is actually, hindering the upscaling of electric mobility in the sub-region. So enabling environment, quite key. Then the third challenge I would say would be, a lack of demonstration pilots to show the viability of the technology. We've already seen from the earlier presentations how, already we have, for example, China, the uptake of electric 2-, 3-wheelers, the uptake of buses. So that is actually lacking. We have a bit of, in some of the countries, we have a bit of piloting, private sector engagement a bit, but real demonstration pilots are missing. But we are, as UNEP, that's one of the things that we're planning to do also under the JEF. And Rob also presented on what we're doing, supporting some demonstration of 2-, 3-wheelers in some of the African cities. So your question on how the Africa platform, regional platform, an investment will actually support these challenges. I would say under the platform, we're planning to carry out capacity building and trainings. And so the first challenge of awareness will be addressed, from the trainings and capacity building that we are planning. The other thing that the Africa platform is planning is a sharing of best practices, bringing countries together. Rob already spoke about tools that will be shared. So countries will be able to share their experiences and of course, see how, how to develop standards, how to develop enabling policies. So, the second challenge of enabling environment, lack of standards, fiscal incentives, for upscale will actually also be addressed. Then the third thing is the Africa platform will also look at financing and business models. We've had a bit of, financing being a major challenge when it comes to electric mobility. And also this is a challenge in the region. Actually, when you look at electric mobility, Africa is, I think, the least, is one of the continents with the least share of electric mobility, and financing is one of the major challenges. So the platform will be able to address that. And not just for the import, financing the import of electric buses, of electric mobility such as buses, but also looking at the possibilities of local manufacturing, local assembly, creating green jobs, how to link that to renewable energies, which is in abundance in some of the countries. If you look at a country like Ethiopia, 100% of their energy is actually renewable. So these are the opportunities that the region has, but we see the platform addressing some of these challenges and supporting the sub-region actually move towards, promoting electric mobility.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Akuma. I saw some questions in the chat box, and Akuma already replied to one. And there was one great question addressed to Mr. Lether and Philip Good, and I believe that one should, all the panelists can answer. Due to the time limit, can I ask the question, and then please, the panelists, give your answer or share insight just within 1 minute? The question is, how can we better support the local production of EVs in low and middle income countries? Can we start with Mr. Lether?
Very quickly, I think this is very important, and where we are supporting e-vehicles, we do encourage local production. And I think what I mentioned in those lower hanging fruits, the 2-wheelers, the 3-wheelers, they can produce a lot at the local scale. Batteries may be imported, certain components imported, but the assembly of those vehicles can be done at the local level. Once we get into more sophisticated vehicles, public transport buses, for example, clearly there's a need to look at where is the most production being undertaken for those types of vehicles. But certainly at the 2-wheeler and the 3-wheeler, local production is a priority. Thank you.
Great. Philip?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'll take it back one step in saying I think the conditions for local production for EVs are probably similar to local production of any particular goods or service, in that one of the baseline conditions, I think from our side, would be how suitable is the region, country for manufacturing in general? Is there a good supply of sites? Is infrastructure in place to support the manufacturing? What are local skills like to be able to work in manufacturing industries? All those sorts of baseline conditions are really important to enable a good, a good manufacturing facility to be able to be built and operate well. Also things like the supply chains, how they will they work? Can products and components, finished products, be imported and exported easily, or are there any particular barriers to that? So I think those are some of the sort of baseline conditions I think that we would look at as a starting point to facilitate that local production.
Thank you. Dr. Rakmi?
Yes, I think the many Asian countries are already, I think, trying to have a transition to electric mobility and the production also. Just like the Thailand is one of the production hub for the car manufacturing. India also actually leading, and the China is leading in terms of the EV and two-wheeler also. Even other country, I think new country also, they are trying to initiate some sort of the, as Jamie said, assembly plant. Actually, I take the example of Nepal, even though I think there are not many electric vehicle or buses now, but there are some private sector initiative already in collaboration with some manufacturing company to have some sort of the, some sort of the assembly hub there. And then, as I said earlier, so in Asia, actually, there is really a huge potential and huge market because of this green energy, actually, clean energy, hydroelectricity. And then actually, we just need the advocacy and then the knowledge there and the push for those policy. And then how, then it need to be supported to those on implementation of those things. Actually, earlier said that actually Rob earlier said that there is really a gap. I think the funders are there. We have a development bank here, and the countries are there, and there is a need. But sometimes there is a mismatch. Maybe the bankable project, and then they need to. I think that maybe they need to be actually more trained about. I think developing those bankable project and then matching, the need with the demand. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Ms. Akutu, briefly. Thank you.
We see definitely local production, especially when it comes to the 2 3-wheelers, as something that is viable. And there's also a lot of startup companies that are already actually trying to set shop in some of the many African countries, because we see, if you look at some of the Eastern and Western African countries, especially, the 2 3-wheelers are actually overtaking import of vehicles because they're being used as the public transport has actually almost failed, so they're being used for public transport. So there are more motorcycles, 2 3-wheelers that are imported than cars, and a lot of given the technologies that are used, a lot of the companies or the countries see local manufacturing or production of these 2 3-wheelers as something that is viable and easy to use, linked to definitely renewable energies because the batteries are small. So we see that as a first step to local manufacturing or assembly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for our session. A little bit overrun. I'll just conclude by saying thank you so much for all the panelists sharing your wisdom and insights. That's really, really useful. And thank you for the participants offline and online raising great questions. Thank you. The second session is closed. Now back to the chairman. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lu, and thank you all the panelists. It's very interesting discussion, ideas. Thank you again. Now we'll move to the third panel. We'll talk, the topic on the country and city program on electric mobility. We'll have 45 minutes on this one. We'll have 4 panelists. The first one is Associate Dr. Hugo Kim school board president of the University of Transport Technology, Vietnam. The second panelist is Nancy Sept, transport engineer, Executive Council of Urban Transport of Dhaka. The third one is Ebrd, Electrical Engineering Standard Department, Kenya Bureau of Standards. The third one is Sheldon Wei, CEO of New Energy Ecological Construction of SAIC, GM Wuling Automobile Company. So, we'll, as the previous two panels go on, we'll follow them. I have some common questions, but at the very beginning, when you answer this common question, please you can have a short introduction to you or to your organization. We prepare some common questions. The first one is we have heard a lot of interesting points. How the introduction of electric mobility needs to be promoted at the global and regional level. Ultimately, the change needs to happen at the national and city level. Can you please provide us some examples of what you are doing to support the shift to electric mobility in your country or your city? How do you think your project will help your country or your city with the upscaling of electric mobility? Could you please change yeah. So, Dr. Go, could you start as first?
Yes, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of Vietnam team, I would like to share some information about our projects related to e-mobility implemented in the university's transport technologies first. And now let me have a moment to share the screen for my presentation. Okay, can you see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. As you know, Vietnam is one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. Traffic demand in Vietnam has also increased rapidly in the past decades, and the transportation sector, especially road traffic, accounts for the large proportion in urban areas, which is the main contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and environmental pollution problems. Under the Paris Agreement, Vietnam has committed its update NDC to cut GHG emissions by 9% in 2030 compared to a BAU scenario using domestic resources. And we increasing this ambition to 27% against the BAU conditions on receiving international support. So in order to achieve this goal, the government of Vietnam has been implementing many solutions to promote sustainable development in which electric mobility is really an environmental friendly option to reduce GHG emissions in the transport sector. So many research projects on electric mobility have been being implemented. Each project has a different approach and being done by many organizations and individuals. They are contributing to a rapid transition to electric mobility in Vietnam. So in addition to projects using domestic funds, our university has also been implementing 4 projects with the international funding, such as you can see in the screen. In addition, you can see the first project. The project names mainstreaming electric mobility, focusing on 2-wheelers in Vietnam. This project is supported by UNEP, and you can. I would like to mention that our projects are only focusing on 2-wheelers in Vietnam up to now. From this project, many aspects of the electric 2-wheelers in Vietnam have been thoroughly studied, and the research results from this project, as presented on the slide, we all have been sent to the Ministry of Transport. And the second project names a study for the development of electric 2-wheelers in Hanoi. This project, and the big project, is that technical assistance for the sustainable development of Hanoi. These projects supported by Ebrd. In this project, in our projects, the tax policies and favorable conditions for the development of electric 2-wheelers in Hanoi will be included, will be studied, especially policies and regulations to facilitate the use of electric 2-wheelers as means of connecting public transport in Hanoi will be also included. I mean, we will develop the policies and regulation in for Hanoi to facilitate the kind of project like last mile connectivities in the urban of Hanoi. And the third project is the development standards for electric vehicle battery swap system. This project will be cooperated with the Vietnam Association of Motorcycle Manufacturers. Now we are waiting for the last approval from Ministry of Transport to carry out this project. And the last one, the project Urban Mobility and Sustainable Electrification in Large Urban Area in Developing and Emerging Economies. In this project, the component of the project in Vietnam is last mile connectivity by 2-wheelers electric scooters for public transport in Hanoi. In this project, we are involved with the Solutions Plus team, doing a lot of activities shown in the 6 work package presented on the slides. You can see the 6 work package on the slide. In this project, beside this work package, we are carrying out a pilot project in Hanoi. Now, I would like to take a minute to introduce briefly about the pilot project in Hanoi. The project will connect Văn Khê BRT with Elmont Hà Đông by electric 2-wheelers, and guests can borrow electric 2-wheelers at one end to go to the other way, the other end. And the distance between the two ends is about 2 kilometers. The vehicles expected to be used in this project is 50 Ludo electric motorcycles and 10 QIQ electric bicycles. And the management of borrowing and returning the vehicles at the two ends will be operated by the app developed by the QIQ company. The name of the app is the Visa app. Related to this pilot, there are two groups partners supporting the University of Transport Technologies, including the first group local authorities, includes Hanoi People's Committee, Hanoi Department of Transportation, Hadong District's People's Committee, and the second group is the private sector, like some company involved in our projects in Hanoi. Now, for this project, we have received the final approval by Hanoi People's Committee and waiting for the social distance removing to push up. I mean, we have to wait for the controlling COVID-19 in Hanoi. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I would like to receive any question to make clear the projects in Vietnam and undertaken by our university now.
Thanks, Dr. Wu. Very interesting. You focus on two-wheeler. Just one quick question that you mentioned about the batteries working. So it's also for the two-wheelers. The batteries working is also for the two-wheelers.
Please, parent, please.
Yeah, Dr. Wu. The question is that you mentioned about the research project on the batteries working. So it's also for the two-wheelers.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So you focus on two-wheeler. Thank you, Dr. Wu. So next one, Nancy, could you quickly give us what you are doing to promote the e-mobility?
About two-wheelers.
Thank you, everyone.
Battery swapping.
Dr. Wu, now we switch to Nancy. Could you share?
Yes, so thank you, everyone, on behalf of the Transit Authority of Dakar. We're doing a lot to support the shift of electric mobility, especially in the capital, Dakar, where first a cost-benefit analysis was performed to analyze the opportunity of introducing electric buses in the Dakar region for public transport. And based on the results of the analysis of the network, it has been recommended to do a pilot project on the two most profitable lines of a restructuration study, which actually is a study that defines the feeder lines of the BRT, and the BRT is the Bus Rapid Transit project that is being presently implemented in Dakar, as well as Train Express Regional, which is a rail transit that is also being implemented right now in Dakar. So the cost analysis study has shown that we could do a pilot study on a pilot project on the two most profitable lines, and the electric bus project on those two lines would be structured through a concession contract in which the transit authority, which is Sept, or the state of Senegal would guarantee the private partner a reduction of import taxes, which could be about from 25% to 48% on the acquisition of rolling stock, and will also provide the various infrastructures. So the private operator will also be responsible for the acquisition of the buses, as well as their maintenance on a 10-year to recover the investment. And based on those results, it also has been recommended to do a feasibility study to introduce the electric mobility in Senegal by actually developing this pilot project and also prepare the country for scaling up through the development of policy framework, capacity building, piloting of the electric vehicles. So basically, if the project is implemented and working, it can be scaled on other profitable urban lines step by step. In this way, the region of Dakar can actually at the end eliminate thermal buses in its transit system. Yeah, so that was the end of the first question.
And when it's proved successful, it can be scaled up. Great. So next one, Robert, could you share yours, please?
Thank you, everyone. So I'm Robert Njoroge from the Kenya Bureau of Standards. So basically, we've been in the standardization aspect of electric mobility. So I believe in 2018, we did a project with UNEP and GIZ, where we adopted 21 standards covering electric mobility that falls under electric vehicles, the electric motorcycles and mopeds, and the hybrid electric vehicles. So since then, we've really identified a lot of gaps in the work that needs to be done in electric mobility. And given that, we are initiating projects with UNEP and other partners, specifically in this case UNEP, to be able to fill in these gaps, which cover some of the areas such as the charging infrastructure, the battery swapping, electric bikes. So in that, we have at KEBS, we have initiated an electric mobility technical committee, which will be focused on developing standards that just address electric mobility. This has resulted from the reason that we have seen an increased need for standards, especially for electric two-wheelers. The uptake, I think it's been mentioned quite extensively by other panelists that we are having a lot of imports of electric motorcycles in Kenya, or rather in Africa. So specifically in our case in Kenya. And in this case, we need standards which will cover these bikes. We don't want just to dump technology. We don't want to have issues which emerge later on, arising from the fact that we did not have standards at that moment. So that is what informed us that we need to develop an electric mobility technical committee. So that is in the pipeline as we speak. And after that, I think the next step for us would be join, since KEBS is, or rather Kenya Bureau of Standards is a member of the International Electrotechnical Commission. We endeavor, right now we are an associate member, where we have 4 committees as P members and 2 committees as O members. So we want to upgrade and be a member of ICTC 69, which covers electrical power, electrical transfer systems for electrically propelled road vehicles and industrial trucks. So what this will do for us is basically we'll be able to voice our stand in the electric mobility sector, and we will be able to receive documents from IEC as well as ISO. For ISO, we are a full member, P member, and also we will endeavor to join the ISO TC22 subcommittee 37, which is on electrically propelled road vehicles. So basically, at the moment, we do for the projects covering electric mobility in terms of standards, we have done what I'll call the first phase, where we addressed the issues that are facing the industry in general. But the projects that we want to initiate, which are in the pipeline, will cover specific issues, such as in Kenya, we are doing a lot of retrofitting. We are having a lot of investors coming here to discuss or start a conversation as regards battery swapping. And this, from extensive engagements with them, we have realized that this is an area which standardization should move the conversation as opposed to the industry. So those are areas where we are really keen in doing, and we hope that hopefully before end of the year or mid next year, we will be talking of these projects having been completed. Obviously, to say that we would need a lot of support from other partners, given that some of the work that is done in matters policy, matters standardization takes time. So there needs to be fast tracking, because the industry is really running, and we don't want to seem as if we are firefighting what has already happened. So in this case, from the Global Electric Mobility Program, I hope as Kenya and as KEBS, we will be a beneficiary so that we can further and quite support some of these programs and ideas that we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. I fully agree with you that standards are critical, either for the vehicle, for the even for the charger, or for the battery swap. Great. So now we will turn to Xiaowen. Here, he's with me here in the meeting room, but we have some problem with our translation system. So Xiaowen will speak in Chinese, and my colleague here will translate in English. Xiaowen, please.
谢谢方律师吧。大家好。柳州的话，汽车产业是柳州的支柱性产业。那么发展新能源汽车是柳州构建新产业体系的重要抓手。所以在2017年的时候，柳州市政府就跟创新通用武以及相关的企业一起组成了联合工作组。 通过政企联动、市场驱动、配套先行等措施，去制定新能源汽车推广的相关便利性政策，去完善新能源汽车使用环境，去打造新能源汽车典型的应用示范场景。那么。
Thank you very much, and thank you for the moderator. And thank you for Mr. Zhang, thank you for the moderator, thank you for inviting me. I come from Liuzhou Lady. So the automotive industry in Liuzhou is the billet industry. So to develop these projects, we needed to build up the new energy system. In 2017, Liuzhou governments and Wu Li and the other organizer, we were together to set up the steering group that through the cooperation and market-driven and the other related measures and policies to the set up new energy, the vehicle, the promotion, the policy, and to improve the environment for the utilization and the build up, we demonstrated the market scenario.
然后通过刚刚提到的一系列的举措，我们逐步的形成了具有地方特色的新能源汽车推广模式。我们把它称之为柳州模式。
Through a series of the policies I mentioned before, some new energy vehicle promotion model with the greater local features and have been gradually formed.
截止目前，柳州市共完成新能源充电设施建设超过2.8万个新能源汽车专用泊位，大概1.6万个，打造了各个类型的新能源汽车应用示范点，约200个。
Here now, the Liuzhou city now they have completed the 28,000 of new energy charging facilities and that's 16,000 the parking lot for the new energy vehicles and also build up to hundreds of new energy vehicle the pilots.
得益于良好的新能源汽车使用环境，那么目前柳州市新能源汽车的保有量已经突破10万辆了，占整体汽车保有量的比例达到了10.7%。可以说在柳州已经形成了购买和使用新能源汽车的热潮。谢谢。
Thanks to good environment for the utilization of the new energy vehicle. Now in the Liuzhou city, we have the stock of the 100,000 new energy vehicle, accounted for 10.7% of the totality. So now we have some good environments in the Liuzhou has been shaped.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. My understanding is that you create the environment to use the electric vehicles so that when the people can be very easily and convenient use vehicles by charging or by so that the city would move to the e-mobility. That's great. So because of time, we'll jump to you may have the final question for you on the I ended up going 4 areas of intervention to support the shift toward electric mobility. I would like to ask you to name the one of which is most important to be discussed at the national city level. The first one is the policy or regulation or standards. I think Robert also mentioned about this one. The second one is the finance or business model, and how you can give the finance support for the electric mobility programs. The third one is focus on the capacity building or technology transfer, the focus on the technology. The fourth one, the one is on the local products. It should have some the right products, either two-wheelers or the motor vehicles. So which one will be the most important one from your perspective? I may start from maybe Nancy. Could you start from you, Lily? Hello, Nancy. Nancy, can you hear? Do you get my question?
I can hear you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I asked which I had 4 points, aspects. Which one do you think is the most important? The first one is the policy or regulation of standard. The second one is finance support. The third one is the technology. The fourth one is the products, the right products for the city or for the nation. So which one do you think is the most important one?
Yes, so in Senegal, in Dakar particularly right now, we lack proper policy regulation. So the first one is the most pertinent to our capital. We basically lack policy and regulatory framework in order to host electric buses. Moreover, there is no standardized import custom norms, as well as selling frameworks that can be applied to the sector. So it is essential for Senegal to have a defined regulatory and policy framework that outlines the different taxes and subsidies to be paid to facilitate the homologation of electric vehicles in the country. So also the country lacks a national plan on the long term in terms of deployment of electric buses or e-mobility in general. So an electric vehicle strategy that clearly outlines national and city targets for the acquisition of e-buses for public transport and marketing strategies for private sector engagement is really a must. We should also include incentives to facilitate investments by transport operators in the sector, and also provide e-mobility capacity building opportunities for private sector. So the first, which is the policy and regulation theme, is the most pertinent for us.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. You pick up the policy. Indeed, that from our experience in China, that the policy is really the important one. Not only in China, but also for other countries, for example. That's Nancy. So Robert, how about you? You already talked about the standards. So do you have any other choices?
I believe our case would also be similar to that of Senegal. That is the first, since we are at the initial stages, policy and regulation would be our most important. Given that policy, in this case, we should have the standards, as I had mentioned about, but to be specific, it would be really important if when we focus, since we import most of this infrastructure, the electric mobility, such as the electric vehicles, currently we do not incorporate the inspection procedures in our standards for electric mobility. So this becomes a headache for us when we're doing inspection, as well as it leads to now the high duty that is charged to these vehicles. So if we are able to address and separate electric vehicles or electric motorcycles, have different policies, different standards with them, it would be easier to do inspection. It would be easier to make our government treasury understand that it's good for us to give incentives such as subsidies for taxation. Also, I believe it would be easy to regulate the sector. As I mentioned, we are having a lot of investors coming in They want to set up charging infrastructure. They want to set up battery swapping stations and all the other sectors that are involved in this industry. And when we have a lot of investors trying to set these things up, and yet we don't have policies, regulations, standards, I believe we'll have a mess. So from my perspective, once we have the policy and regulations in place, it would be good. It would be very easy to regulate the sector. It would be very easy to ask for incentives, for subsidies, and the likes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the standard is the precondition, and also the policy based on the standard is the. I think that the very critical for healthy, and all we can say the sustainable e-mobility, electric mobility transition. Thanks, Robert. Dr. Wu, how about you? What's your pick? Dr. Wu, you are muted.
Okay, as far as I think that in Vietnam, I think the policy is very important. You know that at the government level, there are many policies and decisions assigned specialized to ministries and developed some policies so that I think it should be important for Vietnam, and I'd like to choose the policy and regulations with the first, the most important.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wu. All of you pick up the first one, the policy. So I don't know if you have some different choice.
我认为就是在新能源推广的不同阶段里面，以后它所关注的重点是不一样的。
So personally, I think that in the different stage of the new energy promotion, it will focus on the different focal points.
在新能源汽车推广的前期，政策标准是推广的一个基础。在这一阶段，政策和标准是最重要的。
So in the pre-stage of the new energy promotion, I think the policy and measure and standard is very important for the promotion of the new energy vehicles. In this stage, I think policy and standard are very important.
还是用柳州举例，柳州是为了推广新能源汽车，针对汽车的生产、销售、用车、充电、停车全环节都出台了相关的便利性政策。在这样一个政策的这个支撑下，用车环境打造得非常好，直接促进了新能源汽车的一个消费。
So take an example of the Liuzhou city. In order to promote new energy vehicles, the government focused on a comprehensive policy with the focal point for the production, consumption, utilization, and parking. The government has provided convenience policies and measures. So with this, the support of the good policy, then we have the good environment of the utilization of the new energy vehicle in the Liuzhou. It also goes to promote the new energy vehicle consumption in Liuzhou.
当推广进入到一定规模、一定阶段的时候，那么这个时候，商业模式可能会变得比较重要。
When the promotion in a certain scale, I think a business model will become important.
像柳州以及中国很多的开展新能源汽车推广做得比较好的城市，下一步新能源汽车如何增长，就不能像前期一样依赖政府的扶持，要摆脱补贴以及相关的扶持政策，要靠市场驱动进行推广。
So, for example, Liuzhou City and other cities in China, they have been done very well in terms of the promotion of the new energy vehicle. But in the next stage, how to increase the volume of the new energy vehicle, we will not depend on the policy of the government. We will couple with subsidy and the policy. I think it should be driven by the market for the promotion of the new energy vehicle.
在中国，很多汽车企业也都在提，要从传统的汽车生产制造商向汽车出行产品以及服务综合提供商进行转型。那么我们就会谈到你出行服务的商业模式，有共享出行，以及说你的整个充电生态的运营模式，以及你跟不同行业的一个跨界融合，这些对于我们后期的这个推广来说是非常重要的。谢谢。
In China, a lot of automobile and enterprises they want to shift from a traditional manufacturer and towards the comprehensive services provider in terms of the automotive traveling products. So I think the business model for the traveling in the future are very important, such as the wheel sharing and ecological operation model and of course industry integration. Those are very important in the post stage of the promotion. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaomei. You think that early stage the policy is critical, but if we scale up to the next stage, then the business model will be the key. That's interesting, and I think that's your experience, very helpful. I think that online there is a participant who wants to speak something. So Mohammed, could you have 2 or 3 minutes to you can start and
good evening, everyone. My name is Sana Rasool. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Thank you very much for giving permission to speak a few words. First of all, this has been very informative, and it was very nice to hear what other countries, what Kenya is doing, what China is doing in terms of electric mobility and the initiatives that are underway in addressing this. I just wanted to take a few minutes to give a perspective on Pakistan as well, because electric mobility is a big thing. It's a big concept here in Pakistan. And there's a lot of movement, a lot of initiative, the public sector, the private sector is involved in this. So on behalf of the director, Azim Khoso, I will just give you an overview of our policy and our initiatives on electric mobility. We launched the electric vehicle policy in Pakistan in 2019, and this policy has been designed to give as many initiatives to electric vehicles as possible. So we have initiatives, incentives for 2-wheelers, for 4-wheelers, for trucks, for buses, for all categories of electric vehicles. And the incentives are in terms of the custom duty. There's only 1% custom duty on electric vehicles. The sales taxes on these vehicles have also been considerably reduced compared to diesel and other petrol engine vehicles. So we really think that should incentivize more customer purchases of these vehicles. Furthermore, we have an ambitious program to put 30% of our public transport as electric vehicles by 2030. So we are taking steps. We are now in collaboration with private sector to make this possible. So we believe that in the years to come, the electric mobility concept in Pakistan is going to catch momentum. It's going to gain momentum. We also want to collaborate with international stakeholders on this agenda, and international best practices such as the ones that I've come to know today are most welcome. If anyone has any questions regarding Pakistan's policy towards electric vehicles, I'd be more than glad to answer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's very interesting, and you have lots of incentives. That's great. So, you guys, that's because of the time is up. We are going to close up this panel. I would like to thank you, Dr. Wu, Nancy, Robert, and Xiaowen for your sharing, and the technology of information make the internet make up the world become even smaller, so we can share a lot. As you also mentioned, it's very important for us to share our best practice, to share our experience, and also to share our technology to promote the electric transportation, electric mobility, not only in the urban, but also for the whole country. And that will be very important for us to have the electric vehicles, either the two-wheelers, three-wheelers, or the four-wheelers, that to be driven by the clean energy. That's the key. That's the key for us to address climate change. So very important, very interesting discussion this afternoon. And thanks for your time. I hope that we can meet soon in the future, online, virtually, or we can meet in person, physically. So hope you also enjoy. And you have a good day, good evening, or good afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.